Welcome back to Full Spectrum Frontiers, the podcast where we dive headfirst into the chaos of national security, conflict, and the ripple effects they have on our society. I'm your host, Bennett Tanton, here to break down the big questions and occasionally throw a few sarcastic jabs at the absurdity of it all. Today, we're tackling a topic that's as American as apple pie and political dysfunction. Government shutdowns. Yeah, those things where Congress decides to play a game of chicken, except the stakes aren't just some harmless chicken dinner. It's the well-being of the nation, our military readiness, and even our national security. Who needs enemies when we have this kind of internal sabotage, right? But let me be clear. This isn't about finger-pointing at one party or the other. Both sides have turned shutdowns into a political weapon, wielding them to score points and force concessions. Meanwhile, critical agencies like the Department of Defense and Homeland Security are left scrambling, operating on skeleton crews, and trying to plug gaping holes with duct tape and a prayer. The cost isn't just financial, it's a full-scale erosion of trust in our government's ability to protect and serve. So here's the plan for today. First, we'll explore the mechanics of a government shutdown, what it is, how it happens, and why politicians seem to love them. Then, we'll pull back the curtain on the collateral damage to national security. After that, I'll share some real stories from the people who bear the brunt of these shutdowns. We'll then dive into the political theater behind it all, because let's face it, this is as much about optics as it is about policy. And finally, we'll look at the bigger picture, how these shutdowns chip away at public trust, and what we can do to demand better. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clearer picture of why these shutdowns are such a disaster, and, more importantly, how we, as a society, can stop tolerating this nonsense. But before we get rolling, here's a quick ask. If you find value in these conversations, please take a moment to like, share, and review the podcast. It helps us grow, reach more people, and keep these important discussions going. All right, let's jump in and dissect the chaotic spectacle of government shutdowns. All right, let's peel back the layers of this political onion and figure out how government shutdowns actually happen. Spoiler alert, it's a mix of bureaucracy, ego, and a dash of bad decision-making. If you've ever wondered why the federal government, with all its resources and brainpower, can't seem to keep the lights on, this is where it all begins. A government shutdown occurs when Congress fails to pass sufficient funding for federal operations and agencies by the start of the fiscal year, or doesn't pass a continuing resolution to keep things running temporarily. This isn't a surprise attack. They see it coming from miles away like a slow-motion car crash. But instead of pumping the brakes, politicians hit the gas, hoping the other side will flinch first. Here's how the blame game unfolds. One party typically insists on attaching certain policies or budget cuts to the funding bill, while the other side refuses to budge. It's a standoff. The clock runs out, the government runs out of money, and voila, welcome to shutdown town. And here's the kicker. During a shutdown, only essential operations continue. That word, essential, is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. It means that while our military is still out there defending the homeland, many of them are doing it without pay. Imagine being deployed overseas, putting your life on the line, and knowing that back home, Congress can't agree on how to pay your family's bills. That's the reality. Meanwhile, non-essential employees, think park rangers, administrative staff, and researchers, are furloughed. No paycheck, no work, no idea when the circus in D.C. will end, And even essential workers, like TSA agents and air traffic controllers, are often forced to keep working unpaid. If this sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, that's because it kind of is. Now let's talk about why this keeps happening. One word: leverage. Shutdowns have become a go-to tactic for politicians to force their opponents into a corner. Want to defund a specific program? Threaten a shutdown. Need to rally your base? Use the shutdown as a platform to paint the other side as obstructionists. It's not about governance. It's about winning the next news cycle or election. But here's the thing. No one really wins in a shutdown. Sure, politicians get their sound bites, but the nation pays the price. The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, estimates that the 2018-2019 shutdown cost the U.S. economy $11 billion, including $3 billion that will never be recovered. That's money lost forever. And the long-term consequences, they're even worse. Every shutdown chips away at the credibility of the U.S. government, both domestically and internationally. Allies start to question our stability. Adversaries see an opportunity to exploit, and citizens lose faith in the very system meant to serve them. Shutdowns are like throwing sand into the gears of a machine that's already running on borrowed time. It doesn't just stop the machine, it causes lasting damage. For example, the ripple effects can delay everything from military readiness drills to cybersecurity upgrades. Critical infrastructure projects stall, and morale within federal agencies takes a nosedive. So why hasn't Congress fixed this? The answer is as predictable as it is frustrating, because they don't have to. Shutdowns might hurt the country, but they rarely hurt politicians in the same way. They still collect their paychecks. Their offices stay open, and when the dust settles, most voters barely remember who was to blame. But here's the reality. We, the people, are the ones who ultimately pay the price. Our taxes fund a government that shuts down like clockwork, while our national security and economic stability hang in the balance. It's like paying for a Netflix subscription and getting dial-up buffering instead of streaming. Now that we've laid the groundwork, let's move on to the second part of today's episode. What happens when shutdowns hit our national security? Spoiler, it's not pretty, and it might just keep you up at night. Now we're diving into what happens to national security when the government shuts down. Spoiler, it's not just bad, it's downright dangerous. If you thought a shutdown was just about national parks closing and passport delays, think again. We're talking about a cascade of vulnerabilities that put the entire nation at risk. First, let's talk about the Department of Defense. While active duty military personnel are deemed essential and required to keep working, they're often doing so without pay during a shutdown. Think about that for a second. You've got men and women stationed in hostile territories, flying missions, and manning critical defense systems without knowing when their next paycheck will come. Morale? In the toilet. Readiness? Compromised. You don't fight at 100% when you're worried about your family struggling to pay the bills back home. But the ripple effect doesn't stop there. Civilian employees and contractors who support the military, think logistics experts, analysts, and maintenance crews, are frequently furloughed. That means planes don't get serviced, supply chains grind to a halt, and critical systems are left vulnerable to cyber threats. Speaking of cyber threats, let's not forget the role of agencies like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and the National Security Agency, NSA. During a shutdown, these agencies are often forced to scale back operations, delaying upgrades, threat assessments, and countermeasures. If you're a hacker, or worse, a nation-state adversary like China or Russia. A U.S. government shutdown is like Christmas morning. It's an open invitation to exploit gaps in our defenses. And here's the thing, those gaps aren't just theoretical. In the 2018-2019 shutdown, a State Department report revealed that dozens of cybersecurity staff were furloughed, leaving sensitive systems more vulnerable to attacks. Meanwhile, other agencies, like the FBI, faced delays in investigations, some of which were directly tied to national security. Imagine knowing there's a credible threat, but not having the resources to act on it because Congress can't agree on a budget. Then there's the intelligence community. The folks gathering intel on terrorist cells, tracking foreign actors, and monitoring global hotspots are often working without pay or with reduced support staff. During the 2013 shutdown, then Director of National Intelligence James Clapper testified that approximately 70% of civilian intelligence workers were furloughed. 70%. If you're an adversary, you're paying close attention to stats like that. Let's not forget the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, which oversees everything from border security to disaster response. During a shutdown, DHS employees, including TSA agents, Coast Guard personnel, and Customs and Border Protection officers, are required to work without pay. Over time, this erodes morale and increases turnover, leaving critical gaps in staffing and preparedness. Now, let's get into the big picture. A shutdown isn't just a short-term inconvenience. It's a signal to the world that the U.S. government is dysfunctional. Allies start questioning our reliability, and adversaries see an opportunity to push boundaries. If you're China eyeing Taiwan or Russia meddling in Eastern Europe, a U.S. government shutdown is like seeing your opponent drop their guard in the middle of a fight. And it's not just foreign threats. Domestically, shutdowns delay upgrades to critical infrastructure, including the power grid, transportation systems, and water supplies. These systems are already vulnerable, and delays only make them easier targets for cyber or physical attacks. But here's the real kicker. Even when the shutdown ends, the damage doesn't magically disappear. Backlogs pile up. Readiness takes months to recover, and the financial cost, both direct and indirect, is staggering. It's like slamming on the brakes while speeding on the highway. Even when you start moving again, it takes a while to get back up to speed. Let me paint you a quick hypothetical. Imagine you're an adversary planning a cyber attack. You see the U.S. government enter a shutdown. Cybersecurity teams are reduced, budgets are frozen, and morale is low. That's your moment to strike. You launch a coordinated attack on critical infrastructure, power grids, water treatment plants, even hospitals. The delayed response costs lives, and by the time we recover, the damage is done. That's the kind of scenario we're inviting every time we let these shutdowns happen. So what's the takeaway here? It's simple. National security isn't a light switch you can turn on and off. Every shutdown chips away at our readiness, our resilience, and our reputation. It's not just irresponsible, it's dangerous. All right, now that we've covered how shutdowns impact national security, let's shift gears and talk about the human toll. This isn't just about systems and agencies, it's about people, real lives, real struggles, and real consequences. All right, let's get personal. It's easy to talk about government shutdowns in abstract terms. Numbers, agencies, systems. But behind every furlough notice, every delayed project, and every missed paycheck are real people trying to hold their lives together. These aren't just statistics. They're your neighbors, your friends, maybe even your family members. Let's start with federal employees. There are over 2 million federal workers in the United States, and during a shutdown, many of them are either furloughed or required to work without pay. Now, I don't know about you, but most people I know can't afford to miss a paycheck, let alone multiple. Rent, mortgages, groceries, childcare. Those bills don't stop just because Congress can't do its job. I remember talking to a TSA agent during the 2018-2019 shutdown. He was working full shifts, keeping airports secure, and coming home to a pile of unpaid bills. His exact words were, "I'm doing my part to keep America safe, but who's looking out for me?" And honestly, it's a fair question. And it's not just TSA agents. Coast Guard personnel, the men and women patrolling our waters, interdicting drugs and rescuing stranded boaters, were also working without pay during that same shutdown. Picture this. You're out on a dangerous mission in freezing waters, knowing full well that your family back home is wondering how they'll afford their next meal. That's the kind of stress that takes a toll, not just on morale, but on performance. Then there's the ripple effect on contractors. Unlike federal employees, contractors don't get back pay after a shutdown ends. So if you're a contractor working in cybersecurity, logistics, or maintenance, a shutdown isn't just a delay, it's money you'll never see again. Imagine planning your life around a steady paycheck, only to have it yanked away because of political grandstanding. But the human toll doesn't stop with the workers. It extends to the people who rely on government services. During a shutdown, everything from food assistance programs to housing services is delayed or disrupted. Veterans waiting on benefits, families needing SNAP assistance, and seniors relying on Social Security offices for help. These are the people caught in the crossfire. I recently read about a single mom in Virginia who was furloughed during a shutdown. She worked for a federal agency and relied on every paycheck to make ends meet. When the shutdown hit, she couldn't pay her rent on time and faced the very real threat of eviction. She told reporters, "I've worked hard my entire life, and now I feel like I'm being punished for something I have no control over." That's not just a sob story. It's a reality for thousands of Americans. And let's not forget the small businesses near federal hubs, cafes, dry cleaners, daycare centers that lose significant revenue during a shutdown. When federal workers stop spending, the local economy takes a hit. Some of these businesses never recover. Now here's where things get really maddening. While millions of Americans are struggling, guess who keeps getting paid? That's right, members of Congress. They still collect their salaries during a shutdown. It's the ultimate irony. The people responsible for the crisis are the only ones financially insulated from it. The human toll also has long-term effects. Furloughed workers lose trust in their employers. Talented individuals leave federal service for the private sector, and the government's ability to recruit top talent suffers. After all, who wants to work for an employer that might randomly stop paying them? And let's not forget the mental health impact. The uncertainty, the stress, the feeling of being powerless, it all adds up. Studies have shown that financial stress is one of the leading causes of anxiety and depression. When you multiply that by hundreds of thousands of affected workers, you're looking at a silent crisis that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Here's the thing. Government shutdowns don't just reveal the cracks in the system, they widen them. They expose how vulnerable we are as individuals and as a society when the people we rely on to lead can't get their act together. But, and this is a big but, it's not all doom and gloom. Amid the chaos, you'll find stories of resilience and solidarity, communities coming together to support furloughed workers, churches organizing food drives, families stepping up to help each other. It's a reminder that while our government may falter, the American spirit doesn't. All right, now that we've talked about the human impact, let's take a step back and look at the political theater behind these shutdowns. Because if we're going to fix this mess, we need to understand why it keeps happening. It's time to shine a light on the circus that is Washington, D.C. during a government shutdown. Because let's be honest, these shutdowns are less about governance and more about political theater, a spectacle designed to score points, rally the base, and dominate the news cycle. If you've ever felt like these stalemates are less about solving problems and more about putting on a show, congratulations, you've cracked the code. Let's start with the obvious. Politicians from both sides of the aisle love to frame shutdowns as the fault of the other party. Democrats will say Republicans are holding the government hostage over some controversial demand. Republicans will counter that Democrats are refusing to negotiate. And the rest of us? We're stuck in the middle, watching these blame games unfold like a bad reality TV show. But here's the dirty little secret. No one in Washington really loses in a shutdown, except, of course, the American people. Politicians still get their paychecks, their offices stay staffed, their campaigns get ammunition for the next election, and when the shutdown ends, they move on to the next crisis, leaving the damage behind for someone else to clean up. Now, let's talk about the optics. Shutdowns are an opportunity for politicians to step into the spotlight and craft their narrative. You'll see lawmakers giving impassioned speeches on the Senate floor, tweeting fiery statements, and making dramatic media appearances. It's all designed to make you think they're fighting the good fight, even as the system grinds to a halt. And let's not forget the political stunts. During the 2013 shutdown, members of Congress made a show of visiting closed national parks and monuments, blaming the closures on the opposing party. It's the political equivalent of setting a house on fire and then showing up with a garden hose to help. So why does this keep happening? Because it works. Shutdowns may be disastrous for the country, but they're effective political tools. They energize the base, create sound bites for campaign ads, and give politicians a chance to position themselves as defenders of principle, even if those principles come at the expense of national security and public trust. Now, let's be fair. Not every lawmaker is out there playing games. There are those who genuinely want to find solutions and avoid shutdowns. But here's the problem. Compromise has become a dirty word in Washington. The incentives in our political system reward conflict, not cooperation. If you're seen as too willing to negotiate, you risk being labeled a sellout by your own party. And this brings us to the fundamental issue. Shutdowns are a symptom of a broken system. They're not about budgeting or policy disagreements. They're about power. Who has it, who wants it, and who's willing to use the American people as leverage to get it. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to be this way. Other countries manage to pass budgets without resorting to shutdowns. So why can't we? The answer lies in structural reform. Some experts have suggested adopting automatic funding mechanisms that keep the government running even if Congress can't agree on a budget. Others propose penalties for lawmakers during a shutdown, like withholding their pay or freezing campaign contributions. Would these solutions work? Maybe, maybe not. But the point is, we need to start thinking beyond the status quo, because the current system isn't just inefficient, it's dangerous. Every shutdown erodes public trust, weakens our institutions, and leaves us more vulnerable to both domestic and foreign threats. Now, I know what you're thinking. Bennett, this all sounds great, but how do we fix a system that feels so broken? That's the million-dollar question, and it starts with accountability. As voters, we have to stop rewarding political gamesmanship and start demanding real leadership. Here's an idea. The next time your representative blames the other side for a shutdown, ask them what they did to prevent it. Did they sponsor a bill? Did they advocate for compromise? Or did they just use the crisis as a platform to score points? Because at the end of the day, the only way to break this cycle is to change the incentives. Politicians respond to what their constituents value. If we value solutions over spectacle, they'll start delivering solutions. But if we keep rewarding the drama, we'll keep getting more of it. All right, we've unpacked the political theater. Now it's time to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. How these shutdowns chip away at public trust and what we can do to rebuild it. Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Government shutdowns aren't just temporary inconveniences. They're not just about missed paychecks, stalled programs, or delayed projects. At their core, shutdowns represent something much deeper and much more damaging: the erosion of public trust. Think about it. What is a government if not an agreement between the people and those elected to serve them? We pay taxes, follow laws, and trust that the folks in Washington will keep the trains running on time. But when those same folks can't even pass a budget to keep the lights on, that trust starts to crumble. Let's put this into perspective. Every time there's a shutdown, it sends a message, not just to Americans, but to the world. That message is, we can't get our act together. And when that message gets repeated often enough, people stop believing in the system altogether. Let me give you an example. During the 2018-2019 shutdown, the longest in U.S. history, I heard from a veteran who said, "I served this country for 20 years, and I don't even recognize it anymore." That's not just frustration. That's disillusionment. And disillusionment is dangerous because it breeds apathy. When people stop believing that their government works for them, they stop engaging. They stop voting. They stop holding leaders accountable. Now, here's where it gets even more troubling. Public trust in government isn't just a nice to have. It's a cornerstone of national security. When people lose faith in their government, they're less likely to follow its directives during a crisis. Imagine a natural disaster, a pandemic, or a military emergency where citizens question whether their government can handle it. That hesitation could cost lives. And it's not just citizens who are paying attention. Our allies and adversaries are watching too. When America, historically seen as a beacon of stability, keeps shutting down its own government, it undermines our credibility on the global stage. Allies start questioning whether they can count on us. Adversaries see an opening to exploit. It's not just embarrassing, it's strategically damaging. But here's the thing. Trust doesn't erode overnight. It's chipped away piece by piece, shutdown by shutdown, failure by failure. And rebuilding it? That takes time, effort, and most importantly, leadership. So what can we do? How do we start restoring trust in a system that feels so broken? First, we need transparency. The American people deserve to know why these shutdowns happen and who's responsible. No more vague blame games or partisan spin. Let's put the facts on the table. Second, we need accountability. If a lawmaker is more interested in scoring political points than finding solutions, they need to hear about it from their constituents, from the media, and from their peers. Public pressure works, but only if we apply it consistently. And third, we need reform, whether it's automatic funding mechanisms, penalties for lawmakers during shutdowns, or mandatory arbitration when a budget deal can't be reached. We need systemic changes to prevent these crises from happening in the first place. But let's not kid ourselves. None of this will happen overnight. Restoring trust is a marathon, not a sprint. It requires effort not just from politicians, but from all of us. Because at the end of the day, a government is only as strong as the people who believe in it. Here's the optimistic takeaway. Despite all the dysfunction, the American system is still resilient. It's messy, frustrating, and sometimes downright infuriating, but it's also capable of incredible change. We've faced bigger challenges before, and we've come out stronger on the other side. So while shutdowns are a symptom of a larger problem, they're also an opportunity, a chance to demand better, to engage more, and to push for a government that truly works for the people. All right, folks, that's my soapbox for today. Up next, let's wrap this up with some final thoughts on how we move forward. My friends, is a wrap on today's episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers. We've covered a lot of ground: how government shutdowns happen, the damage they do to national security, the toll they take on real people, the political theater that keeps them going, and how they chip away at public trust. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this episode, it's this: government shutdowns are not inevitable. They're a choice. A choice made by the people we elect to represent us, and that means we have the power to demand better. But here's the thing about power: it only works if you use it. So the next time there's a shutdown, or even a hint of one, don't just shrug it off as business as usual. Ask questions, hold your representatives accountable, and remember, you have a voice. Use it to push for change. Before we close, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on this journey. If you found value in today's episode, I have a quick favor to ask. Please like, share, and review the podcast. It helps us grow, reach more people, and keep these important conversations going. And if you have thoughts, feedback, or ideas for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me a message or leave a comment. I'm always up for a good discussion. As always, stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop pushing the boundaries of what's possible. I'm Bennett Tanton, and this has been Full Spectrum Frontiers. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
It's just you, me, and the odds. We stuck together, we two peas in a pod. You dealt a bad hand, I'm there seizing the cards. We'll never be separated till we see in the gods. We've been low together, high forever. Long as we go together, we'll die whenever. Be a light, couldn't let the darkness try you ever. Truth in my word, you I lie to never. And when the world gets a little too hard, wipe your eyes, put away your sorrow. When it's war, I'll be leading the charge, and I'll be still fighting for you tomorrow. Yeah, even with a blindfold or in different time zones, could find my way to you with my eyes closed. There's nothing between us. Go to Mars and Venus, stand in front of every one of them rocks, they slinging and be a shield. Yeah.
In the fiercest battle, I'll defend you from all these arrows, and the sword I wield will keep you from danger. Let me be your shield.
Yeah, let's go, Let me be your shield, let me be your shield. Let me be your shield, let me be your shield. Let me be your shield, let me be your shield. Let me be your shield, let me be your
You may be facing tribulation, but don't let it get you down. What I'm saying may take patience, but you're gonna make it out. I scorched my own 2 feet to pour